I have, always actually a desire to defend postmodernism whilst giving a critique of it as well. The critique is it manifests in a dysfunctional way, and I think it is because this kind of lack of identity going into it. But the defense is that it later becomes a necessary stage for people, the kind of the deconstruction stage, to hopefully take you somewhere beyond it as well. So I wonder if there's some hope in our mythos that can kind of guide people towards that as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think postmodernism is useful. Like you said, one of the things that postmodernism did was break away from this kind of this idea of like a universal perspective that is completely objective. And it threw people back into their own story and their own narrative. And even though they tried to deconstruct these stories and do all that, like Derrida, I think that Derrida's, let's say his attachment to Heidegger was really important, because he was really able to formulate most of his theories in terms of phenomenology and in terms of experience. So for example, Derrida's definition of a monster, that's the definition I use. He has the best definition of a monster I've ever seen. He understands the periphery. He understands the margins. I always see him as like a prophet of the margin, you could say. And so I think that a lot of the postmodernism understands the fringe and how the fringe works and the way the fringe affects the system and the way that it does deconstruct the system, and in a certain manner necessarily so. But I think that ultimately we have to be able at some point to reintegrate it all together, because you can't just have deconstruction forever. You can't just have, and Derrida himself said that he would always say, we have to reinscribe. After we've deconstructed, we have to reconstruct, we have to reinscribe. But he was always super vague about what that really meant, because that wasn't his thing. He really was a kind of jester fringe figure. But I think that that's kind of our role now, is to be able to say, like, if you look at a lot of the things I talk about, I often try to point out the necessary need for the fool, the necessary need for the carnival, the inevitability of carnival and all of these types of images. But I try to reintegrate them into a bigger story, in which now it's a massive cycle that includes the origin and the end, that includes the beginning and how that space breaks down, but ultimately leads back to an identity and back to a coherent space. It has to, or else what? Or else we vanish, and we get taken over by the outside. Basically, is the only other thing that can happen. If we're not able to kind of restore some inner type of identities, then we're just gonna become food for something else. Maybe is the best way to understand it. Food for another identity.